Hello, beloved pastors and leaders. What a privilege it is to address you at this moment. We now continue with our DNA 1 seminar. We are talking about the cell church, part 2. You just heard the sermon by Pastor Polo Mazzoni, who began addressing this topic, answering what the church is, and he concluded by stating that the cell church embodies these two such important principles to be understood. The truth is that every believer is a minister of the gospel, and that every home is a potential church. And I want to continue this conversation with you by quoting a phrase from Pastor Bill Beckham. Pastor Bill Beckham wrote the following: "The two expressions of the church from the New Testament, in the temple and from house to house, are not matters of culture or convenience. They are expressions of the transcendent and immanent nature of God." Bill chooses two terms that we study so much in theology, which are the transcendent God, the immanent God. The truth is that there is a biblical text that helps us understand this more clearly. And it is found in Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15. The text says, "For thus says the high and exalted one, who lives forever and whose name is holy." Our God states, "I dwell in a high and holy place." In other words, He is the God of greatness. He is the God of the high heavens, the God of the throne. He is the transcendent God. He transcends our understanding. He is greater than anything we could comprehend. He is the transcendent God, but the same text continues saying, "But I also dwell with the contrite and humble in spirit." In other words, He dwells within me. Within you, the transcendent God of the high heavens also emanates, the immanent God who emanates from within us. He is the God of the great and the God of the small, and He is the God of the small to renew the spirit of the humble and to give new strength to the heart of the contrite. And what does the transcendent and immanent God have to do with the church in heaven? Why does He relate these characteristics of God to the fact of the temple and from house to house? This means that we believe that our God is the God of small gatherings, the God of cells, the God of small meetings, but He also is the God of large gatherings. He is also the God who dwells and meets with us in meetings like this. And He, therefore, manifests in these two environments. If we stop to think, it has been this way since the early days of the gospel. When the church was born, the so-called early church was born, it emerged with two fronts, with two very strong characteristics. From the beginning, alongside the 12 apostles, it gathered in the temple every day, as we see in Acts 2, but it also gathered from house, home to house. We call this church with two fronts the church of two wings. This church of two wings is very strong, very significant for us, because when we talk about the church of two wings, we are still quoting Bill Beckham. Bill Beckham, pastor of Touch Ministry, one of the most respected pastors when it comes to cell groups. And he talked so much about the fact of the immanent God, but also the transcendent God, and also about the concept of the church of two wings in his book, The Second Reformation. And I highly recommend you read it. When we think of the church of two wings, the early church clearly started with these two fronts, the temple and the houses. And it flew, it grew, it advanced very quickly, but after a while it stopped. Let's think. When Peter starts the church, along with the other apostles, after the coming of the Holy Spirit, what happened? They began to gather in the temple and in houses, and the church advanced. In Acts chapter 1, we recognize in verse 15 that there were 120 brothers. After Pentecost, on the day of Pentecost, after the coming of the Holy Spirit, in Peter's first sermon, this church already grows to 3,000 people. In Acts 4, at the beginning of the chapter, you will see the church with 5,000 people. It's an astonishing growth. The church is flying at full speed. But at a certain point, this church, which is growing so fast, even loses count. At the end of Acts 4, in verse 31, we already hear about the multitude of those who believed. And in Acts 6, we see that the number of disciples was multiplying. The count became exponential, the church advancing everywhere. This happened for about 300 years. 300 years after the beginning of the church, it assumes power in the Roman Empire. Constantine And this emperor who claimed to be Christian, he declared, look, the persecution is over. It's time for you to gather. You no longer need to stay in houses. Gather in buildings. Here is one of my palaces for you to meet. And the church said yes. The church, which previously flew with 2 strong wings, tried to fly with only 1 wing. I don't have 2 wings, but I have 2 legs. And I imagine how different it would be to run with my 2 legs or try to live the church with only 1 leg. It became more difficult for the church. The church began to grow slowly with difficulty balancing. It was like this with the Central. For 40 years since we were born, as you saw in the first lecture of this seminar, trying to grow with only 1 leg and baptizing a small group of people, and the next year a little more, but always with difficulty, a growth of addition. God called us for multiplication, and the truth is that the cell church is an invitation from God, not for a wing, a leg that you no longer have. It was not cut off from the church. It was just stopped being used. We stopped using that wing or that leg. This means that when we get hurt, if I, for example, had broken my arm and had to use a cast, brothers, after some time without using my arm, it would be atrophied. The houses, the cells for us are atrophied. They exist, but we are not using them, nor believing that there is the potential of a church there. The cell vision is an invitation to put the leg we are not using into physical therapy, so that soon you can start limping. And soon you are walking, and soon you are starting to run. The feeling I have regarding the Central, we will still run much faster. But we believe that cells are the only ecclesiastical structure capable of mobilizing the entire church to be a church and live transformative relationships. Our invitation is, come with us. It's important for you to understand this. The cell vision has transformed the global evangelical landscape. Small congregations have turned into strong churches because they place small groups at the center of their ministry. Everything is interconnected with what Pastor Paulo concluded in the first part of this message. We truly believe that every believer is a minister, without exception, without choosing one gift over another. We are all called, we all have the ability to serve God with our gifts and talents, even with differences. And without a doubt, we believe in the potential that if God does not dwell in a building, He dwells in every home, in every gathering. Every home for us is a church. And with this vision, we are returning to the dynamics of Acts 2 from 42 to 47. I want to invite you to get to know this church a little better. We believe that a church in heaven has values that are non-negotiable. It cannot be negotiated. If we listen, for example, to Pastor Ben Wong, pastor of the largest cell church in Hong Kong, he argues that the cell vision will only prosper if it is seen as principles to be absorbed and put into practice rather than a model to be copied. In this cell church, there are principles that you cannot abandon. And there are 5 I want to quickly share with you. The first non-negotiable value of a cell church is meaningful relationships. Joel Comiskey, Jim Eagle, in their book Groups That Thrive, state that the more cohesive, the more relational, the better the fellowship of this group, the better it will be. Some people think that having too much fellowship is a hindrance. We are not against fellowship groups. On the contrary, the issue is that if we only have a fellowship group, it won't necessarily grow. But it is true that the Christian life holds fellowship as a value. Psalm 133 states that when brothers are united, grace, power, the oil descends upon our heads. Isn't that right? So, fellowship is very important to us. After all, we are part of the same family. The family of God for us, a cell is a lifestyle. It's every day a cell. It's not a meeting. It's an environment where we sit in a circle, but we are winning people's hearts and giving our hearts to them. And we are sharing life and learning from each other. We are truly relating to each other in a meaningful way. So I don't meet the person just once a week. No, they become our friends. Many of the people who walked with me in my cells were my wedding godparents, and I was theirs. And we developed a deep relationship of friendship, of openness, of being able to confess my sins, of being a support for my brothers, of crying with those who cry, of rejoicing with those who rejoice. Without a doubt, they are groups filled with love, ready to reach the world. If meaningful relationship is a value for us, the word relationship is very key to the cell vision. If I could summarize what a cell is a relationship. Relationship with God, but also with people. And if we are creating meaningful relationships, these are not the only relationships we have. We all know people outside of ourselves, people who are far from God, non-Christians, people from our family, work or study environments, our neighbors, relatives. Folks, let's think it's true. Not just us, pastors and leaders, but all the people in our churches. And if the first value is meaningful relationship, the second is evangelism. Through relationships, cells serve not only to create relationships among us, but we use our relationships outside the cell to invite people to the cell. This is the heart of the cell. It is the most natural and effective form of evangelism. I guarantee that if I conducted a survey with all of you who will watch this seminar, folks, the vast majority of you gave your life to Jesus, not at a crusade, not by listening to the gospel on the radio or television, but the vast majority heard the gospel through a friend or relative who invited you, who spoke to you about Jesus. It's important for you to understand that this is a value for us. We need to live this vision, and we believe it is the right strategy to fulfill the Great Commission. Disciples who make other disciples who make other disciples. So far, you have seen two values: meaningful relationships and relational evangelism. What is the third? The third might be the great heart and the secret of the cell vision. I'm talking about the formation and empowerment of leaders. You will learn more about this subject in the DNA 2 seminar. But I need to tell you, the cell vision exists to solve a problem. The truth is that every vision of any institution, organization, including churches, every vision exists to solve problems. What is the problem of the church? Some people think that the cell vision addresses the problem of the harvest. It exists for the harvest. But can I be honest? According to Jesus, the harvest does not have a problem. The truth is that the harvest is only possible because of the workers. Jesus stated that the harvest is ready, but the same Jesus stated that there is a lack of workers. What is our job? To raise other people, to train and empower leaders. And for that, we do this in our daily lives, in the practice of cells, and of course, the church will have to offer a training school to train new leaders. But without a doubt, leader training and empowerment is a great secret and a non-negotiable value for us. We need to form a multitude of leaders to win our cities. And this helps us with the fourth value. The fourth value is the participation of everyone. If I want to train leaders, how do I do that? Besides the church school, we are together in the cells, participating. All of us bringing in new people, participating with our gifts, serving in the functions of the cell. And one week you are responsible for the snacks, the next week you are responsible for the worship, and the following week you might be the one giving the cell lesson, and others take on different roles. Everyone gets involved, everyone ministers to one another. People learn better when they practice what is taught. It's true, brothers, in a program-based church, there is very little for a small group of people to do, and the vast majority are just watching. The role of the vast majority is to sit in a chair and participate. But in a cell, everyone is important, everyone is needed. It is there that you, whether shy or more outgoing, will be invited to participate, and everyone is involved. It is true that the participative cell is the best place to prepare disciples for leadership and to make other disciples. So far, we have talked about 4 values, and now I come to the last one. We have already talked about meaningful relationships, relational evangelism, leader training and empowerment, and everyone's participation. Dear ones, a cell that lives these 4 values will certainly live the 5th. The 5th value is the annual multiplication of the cell. It is the vision of God's redemptive heart. They drive the cell to grow and multiply. Of course, folks, multiplication is the essence of life. The first word that God gave to humanity in Adam and Eve was multiply, or be fruitful, fill the earth. And this goes through Noah, it reaches Abraham, it reaches Jesus in the Great Commission. And the Great Commission says, go into all the world, baptizing people in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything He commanded. And He will be with us until the end of times. What is He saying? Multiply. Create another disciple. And as our cells will multiply every year, and this is a value for us, we will do this by generating meaningful relationships, evangelizing through our relationships, forming many leaders, and of course, involving people's cells that possess the first four values. They will reach the fifth non-negotiable value. To help you, there is a book. I had the privilege of writing this book. If you want to read a bit more and study these values, I recommend reading the book Non-Negotiable Values of the Cell Church. But I want to steer our conversation towards the end. Maybe you are not understanding the seriousness of what I am talking about. As I said, we have to raise crowds of leaders. And does this vision exist to help us with that? As I mentioned, there is no problem with the harvest. The problem lies with the church in the lack of workers. And the text tells us, right? Ask the Lord of the harvest to send workers into the harvest. I want to affirm that we could miss the greatest harvest in history. And do you know why? Because of the lack of workers? Brothers, Joel Comiskey stated that it's not because churches have cells that they make the harvest, it's because they have workers for the harvest. Churches that have no plan to develop leaders are planning by omission to lose the harvest. Brothers, if you don't have a plan in your church to develop leaders, you are planning by omission to lose the harvest. And that is why then I want to ask a question. Which one does the pastor generate the maximum impact of a church after everything you've heard? I want to give you options. It's a multiple choice question. It will appear on your screen for you to see with me. Could it be that what generates the most impact is the ministerial model? Would it be the pastoral ministry or leadership development? After hearing about the purpose of the church, about the cell church, part 1, and everything I've already shared with you, it's obvious now, isn't it? If the church is not the pastor, if the church is not its ministries, as you saw in the first part of this lecture, it's clear that the secret is the development of leadership. And if this is the secret, we believe that leadership development is the greatest secret of the cell vision and multiplication. The truth is, if you are here watching and have already been so challenged by so many things, we believe in this vision and have seen it transform our church. From a small group of people, today we are thousands and thousands of leaders. But I want to finish by extending an invitation to you. We believe and we have a dream. Our dream is a multitude of leaders. Disciples who make disciples, and thus, through the multiplication of cells and leaders, reach this generation for Jesus and transform the world. And after everything you've heard so far, maybe you're already thinking about how to make the transition. I want this too. I want to raise a multitude of leaders. And what I can say is that we are here to serve you. And if God is here speaking to you, inviting you to live this church, a church with two wings, we do not want to weaken your building. On the contrary, we want strong, fervent services, but we also want living cells. We want a church with two wings, if you are understanding this. And if you want to instill non-negotiable values in your church, I can only extend an invitation to you. Shall we go together? Are you willing to come with us? Shall we dive into this vision together? Shall we walk together to become a church with two wings and thus raise a multitude of leaders and win many people for Jesus? This is the DNA invitation for you. Our dream is to walk with you in this process. And now you are going to hear an extremely important lecture. It's the transition lecture part 1. with Pastor Wagner Carvalho. Now it's going to get practical. You will understand the first steps on how to transition from a conventional church model to a church in heaven. But before you go, can I give you a challenge? Spend some time in prayer. Answer in the spiritual realm the question of, shall we go together? What do you think about joining hands with us as a church and together making the harvest? May God bless you, and may you, if guided by God, accept the challenge and come walk with us to live and be a church in heaven. God bless you.